Evan Brooks was the kind of man most people passed by without noticing. He moved through his days like a shadow, silent, steady, and mostly forgotten. At 48, he had long ago traded noise for solitude, noise being the arguments, the slammed doors, the phone calls left unanswered. Now it was just him, the smell of oil-stained concrete, and the low hum of a space heater keeping the chill off the cracked walls of his small auto repair shop on the edge of town. It was Thursday. Evan always brought the same lunch, a ham sandwich, an apple, and a small thermos of coffee he brewed himself before dawn. He didn't care much for variety. Predictability had become his comfort. That day, the sky was overcast, and the kind of cold that got into your knuckles had settled into the streets of Millbury. He was sitting on a turned-over milk crate just outside the garage bay, unwrapping his sandwich, when he saw it. The dog. It stood near the alley entrance, muddy thin, its ribs showing beneath matted fur the color of ash. Its eyes, however, were startling wide, amber-colored, watching him with a kind of ancient sadness, as if it had seen too much of the world already. Evan blinked. He hadn't seen a stray around here in months. The dog took a cautious step forward, then another. He looked down at his sandwich, back at the dog. "Yeah, all right," he muttered, half to himself, half to the wind. "Guess you need this more than I do." He broke the sandwich in half, setting one piece on the concrete and stepping back. The dog hesitated, then limped forward and devoured it with quiet desperation. It didn't growl or rush, just ate, like it hadn't seen kindness in a while. Something about that hit Evan harder than he expected. "You got a name?" he asked softly. The dog looked up, then patted closer. It wasn't until Evan reached out, intending just to scratch behind its ear, that he noticed the collar. A tattered old thing, half hidden beneath the dog's thick fur, faded and worn. And tucked beneath it, barely visible, was a small piece of paper, folded, creased, stuck carefully into the collar ring like someone meant for it to be found. Evan furrowed his brow and gently pulled it loose. The paper was yellowed and damp, but the ink was still legible. He read it out loud, just above a whisper. "If you find me, you've found a promise. Please don't walk away." A strange stillness settled over him. Promise. Evan's throat tightened unexpectedly. The last time he heard that word in a meaningful way had been over a decade ago, a time he rarely let himself remember. He looked back down at the dog. It was sitting now, head tilted slightly, as if waiting. "Where'd you come from?" he asked. But there was no answer, just the low sigh of wind sweeping through the alley. Behind him, the garage buzzed with a reminder, unfinished work, unpaid invoices, and a quiet life that didn't welcome interruptions. But Evan didn't move. That one sentence, the note, felt like a string tugging at something buried deep inside him, something he thought he'd severed a long time ago. He folded the paper, carefully placed it in his jacket pocket, and crouched beside the dog. "You hungry enough to lead the way?" he whispered. The dog blinked, then stood up, and walked toward the alley's end, glancing back once waiting. Evan followed. He didn't know why, not yet, but something in him, the part that had long been rusted shut, had just creaked open. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel quite so alone. The dog's pace was unhurried, almost ceremonial, as if it knew precisely where to go and precisely how long it would take to get there. Evan followed a few steps behind his boots, crunching over patches of gravel and bits of broken glass that lined the neglected side streets of Millbury. He hadn't walked this part of town in years. Everything about it felt familiar, and yet foreign, like hearing a song from childhood played on a detuned piano. Faded murals on brick walls, boarded-up windows where corner stores once bustled, and that old leaning street lamp that had always flickered at night, still flickering now, like it had waited for someone to notice. The dog led him past the diner, where Evan and his sister Clara used to split milkshakes. It was closed now. Had been for a long time. Most things around here were. But the dog didn't pause. It turned down a narrow alley that ran behind a row of forgotten houses, its tail swaying with subtle rhythm. Evan's breath came out in short puffs, both from the cold and the weight pressing down on his chest. He touched the note again through his jacket pocket. "If you find me, you found a promise. Please don't walk away." He couldn't shake the feeling that the note was meant for him, not just anyone. That kind of wording, it wasn't random. It was personal and oddly familiar. At the alley's end, the dog stopped. There, next to a rusted fence gate half covered in ivy, it sat, and looked up at Evan with those same solemn amber eyes. The gate led to nothing special, just an old path that trailed off into a small grove of trees behind the houses. Evan knew those woods, or at least he had once. His mind wandered back to a summer when he was 13 and Clara had dared him to jump off the rope swing into the lake beyond those trees. Back then, she was fearless, wild, the kind of person who made you believe anything was possible. She was the one who'd believed in promises, even when everyone else gave up on them. The dog stood brushed against his leg, then slipped through the gap in the fence. Evan hesitated. His life was back the other way. Bills, oil changes, silence. But something inside him, a voice that sounded an awful lot like Clara's, said, "Go on. You can still choose something different." So he followed. The trees closed in, quickly muffling the outside world. Branches arched overhead like ribs forming the inside of a sleeping giant, and the ground beneath his boots grew soft, with layers of pine and thyme. The dog paused at a clearing, then trotted toward a large flat stone covered in moss. Evan noticed something carved into the rock, barely visible beneath the growth. He knelt, brushing it away gently with his sleeve. A name. Promise. That word again. The same one from the note. The same name he'd whispered once, long ago, on the night Clara left town with her son, and didn't tell him where they were going. Promise wasn't just the dog's name. It was something more. Evan sat back suddenly unsteady. He remembered now. Clara used to talk about getting a dog for Leo. She'd wanted to name it Promise, because she'd said, "A dog never breaks one. People might, but dogs don't." That was before the fight, before the yelling, before he told her he didn't want to be part of her life if she kept making the same mistakes. Before she disappeared. He looked down at the dog. It had curled up beside the stone, resting its chin on its paws, looking up at him as if to say, "You remember now, don't you?" A branch snapped behind him. Evan turned quickly, but there was nothing, just the wind and the trees. He stayed in that clearing for a long time. The air was colder now, and the sky above had begun to gray with evening light. He should have left, should have turned back, but he didn't. He pulled out the note again, unfolded it with trembling fingers, and reread the words. "If you find me, you found a promise. Please don't walk away." And for the first time in years, Evan whispered, "I won't." He didn't know what came next. He didn't know if Clara was still out there. He didn't know if Leo would even remember him. But he knew this. He couldn't walk away again. Not from the dog. Not from the past. Not from whatever this was trying to lead him toward. He stood, and the dog rose beside him, ready. Somewhere ahead, buried beneath time and brokenness, was something worth finding. Or maybe someone. The wind picked up as Evan stepped out of the grove, the trees behind him, whispering like old friends, with secrets they weren't quite ready to share. The dog. Promise, he supposed, now, without needing confirmation, walked ahead without hesitation, as if it had a map in its bones. Evan, however, felt unmoored. Each step brought the past closer, and it scraped at him like sandpaper. They moved toward the southern edge of town, where the streets grew quieter, and the houses fewer. He recognized the turn in the road before it came. A gentle bend that opened to a field overrun with wild grasses and wind-bent weeds. And in the middle of that field, still standing despite the years, was the farmhouse, the place where it all began, and where it all came undone. It looked smaller than he remembered. The porch sagged, paint peeled in long curls down the siding. One of the second-story windows was broken. a triangle of sky reflected in its jagged edge, but it was unmistakable. He stopped at the rusted gate that lined the front yard. Promise didn't. The dog trotted through the gap in the fence, then sat at the base of the porch steps, looking back as if to say, "We're here." Evan didn't move. He hadn't been back since he was 23. The night he stormed out, yelling things at Clara, he wished now he'd swallowed. That night she cried, Leo cried, and he slammed the door. Because he didn't know how to love something that felt so broken. But she'd asked him to stay, asked him to believe she could be better. And he didn't. I couldn't, Evan thought bitterly. But maybe I didn't want to try hard enough. He walked slowly up the path. The air smelled of wet leaves and old wood. His fingers ran along the porch railing, feeling the same grooves he'd carved with a pocket knife one summer when he and Clara still laughed together. Inside, the door creaked as he pushed it open. The hinges resisted, but not enough to stop him. Dust hung in the air, like memory. The furniture was still there, draped in white sheets, some torn and sun-stained. The fireplace was filled with crumbled ash. A picture frame lay face down on the floor. Promise wandered in, nose low, sniffing. Evan's boots echoed on the warped wooden floor as he stepped inside fully. Everything was familiar, but blurred, like viewing a life he once lived through frosted glass. In the living room, the wallpaper was peeling. The same daisies Clara had insisted on. "It makes the place look hopeful," she'd said once. He blinked hard. He couldn't stop the flashback this time. It rose without warning. Leo, 6 years old, was drawing dinosaurs with bright crayons on the hardwood floor tongue sticking out in concentration. Clara sat on the couch, her eyes tired but full of pride, watching him. She looked up at Evan and smiled. "Promise me something," she'd said. Evan had grunted, teasing. "Another one." She laughed soft. "Promise me. If I mess things up again, you'll still be there for him." He didn't answer. Not then. And in the end, he didn't keep the promise she never got. Now he was here. But she was gone. He knew that much, at least he thought he did. Promise. Barked sharply a single sound, then scratched at the floorboards near the fireplace. Evan turned. "What is it?" The dog kept pawing, insistent. Kneeling down, Evan brushed aside years of dust and debris. One of the boards was loose. He worked his fingers under the edge and lifted. Beneath it was a small tin box, rusted at the hinges, the kind kids once kept marbles or secret notes in. His breath caught. He opened it. Inside were folded papers, letters. On top of the stack, in a handwriting he hadn't seen in years, was his name. Evan. If you're reading this, it means Promise found you. Or maybe you found him. Either way, I'm glad. I didn't want to leave things the way we left them. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I'm sorry I didn't stay. But you needed to find your own peace before you could forgive me. Maybe Promise will help you do that. Love, Clara. The words blurred as tears filled Evan's eyes. He pressed the page against his chest, like it might warm the hollow place inside him. Promise lay down at his feet. For a long time, Evan didn't move. He just sat there on the floor, surrounded by the weight of what had been lost, and the flicker of something he thought he'd buried with it. Maybe he wasn't too late. Maybe some promises still had time to be kept. He folded the letter and placed it gently back in the tin. There were more letters underneath, but one stood out. It was addressed to Leo, and it was unopened. Evan returned to the house as night fell. The forest, though quiet, had begun to hum, with the low sounds of twilight, rustling branches, a distant owl, and the soft crunch of leaves beneath Promise's paws. Back inside the farmhouse, the air felt denser, like it had been holding its breath in his absence. He flicked on the flashlight on his phone and made his way back to the living room. Promise followed without a sound, as if it knew this moment required stillness. Evan sat again beside the fireplace where he had found the tin box. He opened the lid and removed the remaining 5 letters, placing Clara's note to Leo gently to the side, then unfolded the first of the dated ones. The paper crinkled softly in his hands, and the ink had bled slightly with time. Still, her handwriting remained distinct, familiar, firm, and unflinching. May 19th. I keep thinking, maybe you'll come back, not because you owe me anything, but because you used to believe in me more than I believed in myself. I know I failed, and I know you think I gave up. But Evan, this place wasn't just a house. It was hope, for me, for Leo. Even now, when everything feels like it's collapsing, I still come here. I still remember the way we used to be. Evan paused. He took a breath, then kept reading. June 2nd. I found Leo drawing under the treehouse today. He didn't know I was watching. He still hums when he draws. Same tune he always used as a kid, do you remember? That silly song we made up about the stars being sleepy fireflies. I cried today, Evan, because I realized he's growing up without you, and that wasn't fair to him, or to you. His eyes burned. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of the paper and let it settle on the floor beside him. July 10th. There's something I need to tell you. I don't know if I'll ever be brave enough to say it out loud, but here it is. I never hated you. Not even after the fight. I was angry, hurt. But I knew why you left. You were scared of watching me ruin things again. You were scared to believe in me one more time. I get that now, but I never stopped waiting for your knock on the door. Just once. A silence settled in the room. A deep, hollow silence that seemed to stretch beyond the house and into the years that had slipped away unnoticed. Promise curled up in the corner, by the hearth eyes, open head low. Evan reached for the next letter. September 1st. Leo asked about you today. He saw an old photo of us and said, Mom, did he used to be fun? I didn't know what to say. I told him, your uncle loved you, Leo, more than anything. And he said, then why did he leave? I couldn't answer. Not really. I just said, sometimes adults are sad in ways they don't know how to fix. The room felt smaller, closer. Evan dropped his head into his hands, letting the weight of it all press down. He could hear her voice in every word, could see her sitting in this same room writing these notes, unsure if anyone would ever read them. But she wrote them anyway, because that's who Clara was, always reaching out, even when no one reached back. He unfolded the last letter. It wasn't dated. It was the shortest one of them all. If you ever read this, Evan, thank you. For remembering me. For not walking away forever. I love you. Always. He sat there unmoving for what felt like hours. Eventually the flashlight dimmed, the battery low. The house faded to darkness again. But something inside him, something quiet and still and honest, had started to flicker back to life. He wasn't just mourning Clara anymore. He was beginning to remember who he used to be, and maybe who he still could be. Promise lifted its head watching him, and then softly, gently, Evan whispered, I'm sorry. Not to the dog, not to the house, but to her, to Leo, and to the younger version of himself who had once believed in second chances. He placed the letters back in the tin and held it against his chest like something sacred. Tomorrow he would find Leo. He didn't know how. He didn't know what he'd say. But he would find him. Because the only thing heavier than regret is an unopened promise. The letter to Leo weighed heavier than the tin itself. Evan held it in his hands, reluctant to open it, even though it wasn't addressed to him. The envelope was sealed, the flap yellowed, but intact. On the front, Clara had written her son's name in careful script, the kind she used when she wanted to make sure something felt important. He turned it over, fingers tracing the edges. For a brief second, he considered opening it anyway, to read the words, to know what Clara had wanted her son to understand. What she couldn't say in person. But something stopped him. It didn't belong to him. And for once, Evan didn't want to take something that wasn't his to hold. He placed the envelope gently back inside the tin and closed the lid. Promise stood now, tail twitching, as if sensing something had shifted. Something had cracked open in the air between memory and now. Evan glanced around the living room again. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was listening. Like the house itself, remembered him and Clara, the arguments and the laughter, the hope, the regret. He wandered into the kitchen. The sink still held a chipped porcelain mug turned upside down. The wallpaper here had peeled almost entirely away, but the table was still there, the one Clara bought secondhand, and refinished herself, sanding each leg down until her hands blistered. "It's not perfect," she'd said proudly, "but it's ours." He sat in the same chair he used to the one closest to the window. The glass was fogged with age, but through it, he could see the back trail, the one that led into the deeper woods. A trail that decades ago always led to adventure, to possibility, to escape. They used to sneak out that way when things were bad, when the world in the house was too loud and Clara needed fresh air and freedom. She'd take Evan's hand and say, "Come on, let's run till our lungs burn and our thoughts fall out." He swallowed hard. The dog brushed against his leg, then walked toward the back door. It scratched at it twice, paused, then looked back. Again, Evan asked. Promise barked softly, and Evan followed. Outside, the cold had sharpened. Late autumn had stripped most of the leaves from the trees, leaving branches, like skeletal fingers, against a gray sky. The trail ahead was faint, but it was there, worn into the ground by time memory, and perhaps the occasional visitor. Promise led the way, pause, silent against the earth. Evan kept his hands tucked into his jacket pockets, the tin of letters now secured in his backpack. He wasn't sure what he was looking for out here, but he knew better than to ignore the feeling in his chest, that low, aching pull that said, "You're getting closer." 10 minutes into the woods, the trees opened into a small clearing. At the center stood a treehouse. It was barely standing. One wall had collapsed, the ladder was long gone, and the rope swing that once hung from the side was now nothing more than frayed string fluttering in the breeze. But it was unmistakable. They built it the summer Clara turned 18. She'd begged Evan and their dad for help. Her dream, she'd said, was to give Leo a place where he could always feel safe. A little world in the sky, she called it. They never finished it fully. Their dad left, money got tight, and Clara, she changed. But the frame remained, and the promise of it. Promise sat at the base of the tree nose, pointed up. Evan looked, and for a moment he imagined a little boy sitting up there, legs dangling, drawing stars on the wooden walls. Then came another flashback. Leo, maybe 8, sitting beside Evan on the porch steps of this very house, clutching a shoebox. "Uncle Evan," he said, "do you think Mom's okay when she goes away?" Evan paused. "She always comes back, doesn't she?" Leo nodded. "But I don't want her to leave anymore." Evan looked away then. He didn't have the heart to promise something he couldn't control. And maybe that's when Leo stopped asking. The wind stirred the trees. The silence pressed close again, not threatening, but urging. Evan walked to the base of the treehouse, placing a hand on one of the beams. He didn't know what had happened after Clara left, only that she never reached out again. And neither had he. He had excuses, work pride, the ache that came with trying to fix what was already broken. But none of that mattered now. She was gone. And Leo was somewhere out there, maybe still carrying the weight of questions Evan never answered. He sat in the grass beneath the treehouse, back against the trunk as Promise curled beside him. Above him, the wind whispered through the slats. He pulled the tin from his pack and opened it again. This time he counted the letters, 7 in total. 1 for him, 1 for Leo, and 5 more addressed to no one, just dated like diary entries Clara never sent. He didn't read them. Not yet. Instead, he watched the sky darken into a quiet blue, the kind of dusk that only happens in empty places where the air holds every sound just a little longer. Promise laid its head on his knee. Evan stroked the dog's ears, a rhythm, born not of comfort, but need. He didn't speak. There was nothing to say. Not yet. But he knew now this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of what he didn't know. But he was ready to find out. The morning air was crisp as Evan walked through the heart of Millbury. The town had changed storefronts, repainted new benches installed by the city council, a fresh coat of mural art splashed across what used to be an abandoned hardware shop. And yet, beneath the layers of change, everything still felt the same. Quiet, watching, waiting. He didn't have a plan, only a direction. Clara's letters had stirred something ancient in his bones, a compass made of guilt and hope, pointing him toward unfinished things. He clutched the small tin box in his bag, like it held more than just paper. It did. It held a key to a door he had once slammed shut with too much noise and not enough thought. Promise trotted beside him, leashless free in the way only dogs and children dared to be. They passed the bakery. The bell above the door jingled with the same sound Evan remembered from his teenage years. The scent of cinnamon and yeast drifted onto the sidewalk. And then he saw him. Sitting alone on a park bench near the fountain, head down hands, busy with a sketchbook. Evan stopped cold. The boy was maybe 16, maybe 17, tall, lean, a little too serious for his age. Messy curls hung just past his ears, and his sneakers were scuffed at the toes like he walked everywhere. He wore a jacket, 2 sizes too big sleeves, half covering his palms. Promise barked one sharp alert, and the boy looked up. Those eyes. Evan's stomach twisted. Amber brown. Just like Clara's. Just like his. Leo. It had to be him. The boy squinted, unsure. Then his eyes dropped to the dog. And everything changed. "Promise," he said, standing quickly. The sketchbook slipped from his lap and hit the bench. The dog barked again twice and ran to him, tail wagging furiously, body vibrating with recognition. Leo dropped to his knees and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck. "You came back," he whispered into its fur. "You actually came back." Evan stood frozen. The moment was beautiful. And he didn't know how to enter it. He felt like a trespasser in something sacred. Leo stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his jeans hand, still on the dog's back. His eyes finally met Evan's. Is he yours?" the boy asked cautiously. Evan cleared his throat. "No, not really." "Then how'd you find him?" There it was. The first wall. A simple question with a long, tangled answer. Evan swallowed. "He found me. Outside my garage." Leo blinked. "Wait, the garage by the train tracks." "Yeah, I've seen you," Leo said. "You're always there, sitting out front at lunch." Evan nodded once. A pause settled between them. Then Leo looked down at Promise again. "He's been gone for months. I left flyers everywhere. People said I should give up." "Your mom named him, didn't she?" Evan said carefully. Leo looked up again, surprised. "Yeah. She said it was because dogs never break promises." Evan's hands trembled slightly. He shoved them into his jacket pockets. She believed that. Leo tilted his head. "Did you?" "Know her, I did," Evan said. "A long time ago." "Were you friends?" Evan hesitated. "No," he said finally. "I was family." Leo's brows pulled together. "What do you mean, my name's Evan?" he said, voice tight. "Evan Brooks." He saw it, the flicker behind the boy's eyes. Recognition, confusion, and then something colder. "My mom used to talk about you," Leo said. "Her brother. She said you were gone." "I was," Evan admitted. "Too long." Leo crossed his arms. "Why now?" The question sliced deep. It deserved more than an answer. It deserved years of explanations. And a mountain of apologies. "I found the house," Evan said quietly. "The one by the woods. I found the letters." Leo's eyes went wide. "You went back? I didn't plan to. Promise. He led me there. And He broke off. "I found her words, the ones she never got to send." Leo looked away. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "You don't get to just show up after 15 years and expect everything to be okay." "I don't," Evan said. "I wouldn't dare." "Then why are you here?" "Because I owe you more than silence." Leo picked up his sketchbook and clutched it to his chest. "I have to go." He turned. Promise whimpered and looked back at Evan, uncertain. "I have something for you," Evan called out. Leo stopped but didn't turn. Evan carefully removed the sealed letter from the tin and held it out. It's from her. For you. Unopened. I didn't read it. I couldn't. Leo turned, slowly, gaze falling on the envelope. His hand reached out on instinct, almost afraid to touch it. When he finally took it, he didn't open it, just stared at the name on the front. His own. You should read it somewhere quiet, Evan said. She left it for you. She wanted you to know something before she was gone. Leo didn't respond. He tucked the letter into his sketchbook and turned to walk away. But as he did, he said just loud enough for Evan to hear, She waited for you, you know. Then he disappeared down the sidewalk. Promise lingered for 1 second longer, then followed. Evan stood in the empty park, alone again. But this time, it felt different. Not final. Not like a door closing, but like one, slowly creaking open. And maybe, just maybe, someone was standing on the other side, waiting. The park bench felt colder the next day. Evan sat with 2 paper cups of coffee in hand, one for himself, one untouched. The seat next to him remained empty. Promise was gone, presumably back with Leo. A part of Evan missed the dog more than he wanted to admit. Not for the company, though, that too, but because Promise had become a bridge. A silent four-legged thread that connected 2 timelines Evan had spent years pretending didn't exist. He watched the leaves tumble across the pavement, golden and brittle, like old memories being carried off by the wind. She waited for you, you know. Leo's words echoed in his head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. Clara had waited, with letters, with love, with loneliness. And Evan hadn't come. It was easier back then to stay away. Easier to pretend he was the injured one. That Clara had made her choices, and he had simply moved on. But the truth, raw and unmistakable now, was that he'd run, when she needed him most. And now her son, this tall, quiet boy with his sketchbook and shuttered eyes, was the last fragile link to a bond Evan had all but abandoned. He sighed, sipped his coffee, and stared straight ahead. He didn't know how to fix it. He only knew he had to. The next day he returned. Same bench, 2 coffees, no Leo. He returned again, and again. By the 4th day, the barista at the cafe gave him a crooked smile. Someone waiting on someone, she asked. He gave a faint nod. She handed him the 2 cups. Good luck, she said softly. Evan walked back to the park, the ritual beginning to carve itself into his days. He sat. He waited. He watched the people pass, a man with a golden retriever, a mother and daughter feeding pigeons, a pair of teenagers filming a dance. Still no Leo. But Evan stayed, because someone needed to. On the 5th day it rained, thin, unrelenting drizzle that soaked into his coat and clung to his neck. He sat anyway, both cups in hand. He watched the sketchbook in his bag, Leo's drawings from the day they met, forgotten on the bench after their conversation. He hadn't opened it, wouldn't, but it rested in his backpack like something alive, something waiting. And then still here. The voice made him look up. Leo stood in front of him, hood-up jeans damp at the ankles, one hand in his pocket, the other gently gripping Promise's leash. Evan blinked. Hey, I figured maybe you would have given up by now. I almost did, Evan said honestly. But I remembered something Clara once said. Leo raised an eyebrow. She said, love doesn't always show up on time, but it should always show up eventually. Leo's eyes flickered. Evan held out the 2nd cup of coffee. Leo hesitated, then sat. He didn't take the coffee, but he sat. It was enough. They didn't speak for a while. Promise laid down between them, content and warm. You didn't open the sketchbook, Leo said suddenly, his voice low. No, Evan replied. It's not mine. Most people would have looked. I'm not most people anymore. Leo let out something between a scoff and a sigh. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I read the letter. Evan waited. She said she forgave you, Leo continued. That she wanted me to, too. He swallowed. But I don't even know you. I know, Evan said gently. But maybe we could change that. Leo glanced at him. You think sitting here with coffee is enough? No, Evan admitted. Not even close. But it's a start. Another pause. Then Leo reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. It was a photo folded in half, edges frayed. He handed it to Evan. It was a picture of Clara, holding a toddler. Leo. Both were laughing. It was taken in front of the farmhouse, long before time had stripped the place of color. She used to talk about the way you made her laugh, Leo said. Said you were her best friend once. Evan stared at the photo. She was mine. She wanted us to find each other again, Leo said. Didn't she? Evan nodded, too choked up to speak. Leo looked down at Promise. Then, I guess you were right. Some promises aren't broken, just delayed. Evan smiled, a crooked, wet smile. Leo finally took the cup of coffee. And in that moment, in that quiet, rain-blurred sliver of time, the cracks began to close. Not completely, but enough. Because sometimes healing doesn't happen in great declarations. Sometimes it begins on a park bench, between a boy and a man who should have never been strangers. A week later, Evan found himself standing awkwardly in the middle of the Millbury Animal Rescue Center, unsure of what to do with his hands. The place smelled like clean pine and damp fur. Kennels lined the walls, each filled with dogs in various states of curiosity, excitement, or indifference. Somewhere near the back, a cat let out a long, judgmental meow. Leo had asked him to come. He hadn't said why, just texted him with a short, "Meet me at the shelter. 4 p.m." So Evan came. That he'd learned was what mattered now. Not having answers, not saying the right thing, just showing up. Leo appeared from behind a row of kennels, Promise trotting close beside him. The dog looked cleaner now, groomed, its coat brushed out into a healthy shine. Leo looked different too. Not dramatically, just more steady, less like someone carrying a weight alone. He handed Evan a clipboard. They asked if you could fill this out. For Promise's adoption file. Evan blinked. Leo nodded. They thought he was still a stray, but technically he's between owners, and I don't have a permanent address. Evan looked at the clipboard, then up at the boy. Leo added quickly, you don't have to keep him. It's just paperwork. They just want to know he has someone on record, in case anything happens. Evan nodded. Okay. He filled it out slowly. Name, address, emergency contact. He hesitated at the line that read, relationship to animal. He stared at it for a long moment, then wrote, family. When he handed it back, the volunteer at the front desk smiled. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. Leo's talked a lot about Promise. Says the dog showed up out of nowhere. Evan smiled faintly. That sounds about right. The woman leaned over the counter, lowering her voice slightly. He's a good kid. Comes here every week. Reads to the dogs. Volunteers when he can. We always wondered where he lived. Evan's eyes followed Leo across the room as the boy knelt beside a shy greyhound, gently stroking its back and whispering something into its ear. He's strong, Evan said. Stronger than he knows. The woman nodded. Takes after someone, I guess. Evan didn't respond, because he didn't know if that was true yet. Later, as they walked out together, Leo carrying a folder of vaccination records, and Promise leading the way, Evan asked quietly, how long have you been coming here? Leo shrugged. A year, maybe more. Why Leo didn't answer right away. Then, because it was quiet, and the dogs didn't expect anything. You just sit and they sit with you. No questions. Just time. Evan nodded. He understood that more than he could say. Promise. Veered toward the nearby park path, tugging slightly at the leash. Leo laughed softly. He remembers everything. They followed the dog's lead again like before. But this time, they walked together, side by side. As the sun dipped behind the trees, Leo spoke again. Mom used to say this shelter was her second home. Said the animals made her feel safe. Evan looked over. She said that to me too. She always wanted to bring me here, Leo said. But something always got in the way. Work, bills, life. Evan waited, Leo continued. After she passed, I found a note in her old notebook. It just said, Bring Leo to the shelter someday. Let him see what hope sounds like when it barks. Evan felt the air catch in his lungs. They stopped near the bench they had shared days before. Promise hopped up and lay across the wood slats, like he owned the place. Leo sat. Evan followed. I came here after the funeral, Leo said. I didn't want to go home, and I didn't want to go to a friend's house and pretend I was okay. You were alone, Evan said softly. Leo nodded. I didn't know how to find you, Evan added. Or if you'd even want me to. I didn't, Leo admitted. At first, I was angry. I thought you didn't care. Evan looked down at his hands. But then Leo said, I started thinking. Maybe Promise showing up meant something. Like Mom sent him. Or, I don't know. Like the universe was trying one last time. Evan smiled, bittersweet. She always believed in signs. Leo reached into his coat and pulled something out, a drawing. A sketch of Promise, sitting between two shadowy figures on a park bench. One older, one younger. Neither drawn with full detail, just outlines. In the sky above them, Clara's face emerged from clouds, soft and smiling. Evan stared at it. She'd like this, he whispered. Leo folded the paper and handed it to him. She said in her letter she forgave you, he said. But she also said you'd have to earn mine. Evan met his eyes. I will, he said. Every day I can. Leo nodded once. The sky turned gold above them. And Promise, nestled between them, sighed in contentment. They sat in silence again. But this time it wasn't the silence of distance. It was the silence of healing. Of a bond slowly mending. Of two timelines beginning to braid into one. And in that quiet, under a setting sun and the watchful gaze of the past, Evan knew he hadn't just found the dog. He had found his way home. The calendar still hung in the farmhouse kitchen, faded, stained with time, its pages yellowed and curled at the edges. Evan hadn't noticed it before. Not until he returned one quiet morning alone, needing the house more than he could explain. Leo had school. The boy was hesitant, but he didn't ask questions when Evan said, There's something I need to check. The dog had stayed behind this time too. It felt right. Like this trip wasn't for them. It was for her. Evan stood in front of the calendar, flipping gently through the brittle pages. The year was nearly a decade old, but one date had been circled in red marker over and over again. October 21st. Today. A lump formed in Evan's throat. He hadn't remembered. Clara's birthday. He closed his eyes and leaned against the wall. The kitchen smelled the same of pine and thyme, of old wood and quiet history. He could still see her barefoot, her robe, too long, dancing across the kitchen tiles to some forgotten 90s song while the coffee brewed. She'd sing into a wooden spoon and call Leo her backup singer. It had annoyed Evan once. Now it felt like the most precious sound in the world. He needed to hear her again. Evan crossed the room to the old cabinet near the back hallway. The bottom drawer used to stick, Clara always kicked it open with her heel. He tried it. It stuck. He smiled, then kicked. It popped open. Inside, a box of cassettes. He pulled them out one by one. Most were mixtapes labeled in her handwriting, drive songs, heartache jams, rainy day belters. Then, near the bottom, one marked in thicker black ink for Leo in case. He stared at it. The label was smudged, but the message was clear. A lump rose in his chest as he gently carried the cassette to the small boombox in the living room. He dusted it off, plugged it in, prayed it still worked. The tape clicked into place. A hiss. A whir. Then her voice. Hey, baby. If you're hearing this, it means things didn't go the way I hoped. Her voice cracked, but she pushed through. I wanted to be there for every drawing, every late night, every dumb movie you want to rewatch 10 times. I wanted to see the man you'd grow into. Evan sat on the floor, knees to chest barely breathing. But if I couldn't be there, I wanted to leave something real. Not just memories, but proof that I tried, that I loved you beyond words, that I believed in you, and in promises. There was a pause, the sound of her sniffing, clearing her throat. And if your uncle ever hears this, I hope he knows I forgave him a long time ago. He just didn't know how to stay. But he had a good heart, Leo. He always did. He just lost the map. Evan buried his face in his hands. So today's your birthday. Or maybe it's mine. Or maybe we're just playing this on a random Tuesday. Doesn't matter. What matters is this: you are never alone. Even when the world feels empty, even when the house is quiet, even when people leave, promise will find you. Love will find you. Even if it takes years. Happy birthday, Leo. Or Evan. Or anyone who needs this. I love you. I always did. And I always will. The tape clicked. Silence. Evan sat in that silence for a long, long time. Eventually, he walked outside to the overgrown garden behind the house. He knelt in the soft earth hands, shaking, and planted the cassette in the ground. He didn't know why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was a ritual. Maybe it was just a way of giving her voice to the place she had loved. I remembered, he said aloud. To be fair, it took me a while. But I'm here. And I remembered. He stayed in the garden until the light dimmed and the cold settled in. Then he returned to the bench. This time, Leo was already there. Promise was lying across his feet. Evan sat. Neither of them spoke, until Leo said, "You look different." Evan smiled. "I think I found something." "What's your mom's voice?" Leo looked over, startled. Evan nodded. "She made a tape. For you. I listened to it. I hope that's okay." Leo's eyes softened. "What did she say?" Evan looked down at the ground. "That she loved you. That she believed in you. That she forgave me." Leo didn't reply, but he reached into his backpack and pulled out something small. A cupcake. Frosting lopsided. Candle crooked. A little smashed on one side. She always said birthdays weren't about perfection, he said. Evan took it. He pulled a lighter from his pocket, the kind he kept around for emergencies. Lit the candle. They sat. Two souls, one flame, flickering in the wind. Evan looked at the candle and whispered, "Happy birthday, Clara." Leo whispered beside him, "We didn't forget." Promise barked once. Then the wind carried their silence out over the town. And in that moment, Evan knew she hadn't really left. She just moved into the spaces between them, soft, invisible, and forever. The knock on Evan's garage door came earlier than usual, sharp. 3 quick raps. He wiped his hands on a rag and looked up from the hood of the car he'd been tinkering with. The morning light poured through the cracked window dust, floating in golden shafts across the workbench. Promise barked once from his corner rug. Evan opened the door. Leo stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, face tight. "We need to talk," the boy said. Evan nodded, stepping aside. Leo entered the space, like he was stepping into a memory he hadn't chosen. He looked around the scattered tools, the half-assembled engine, the old framed photo of Evan and Clara from high school taped to the back wall. He pointed to it. "You kept that." Evan looked over his shoulder. "I couldn't throw it out." Leo nodded once, then dropped his bag to the ground and crossed his arms. "I need to know what happened." Evan didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Between me and your mom." "No," Leo snapped. "Between you and you. Why did you leave? Why did you disappear when she needed you?" The air in the garage thickened. Evan leaned back against the workbench, tired already. "I was 21, he said quietly. "I thought I was broken. Our parents were gone. Clara was raising you. I felt useless, like I'd already failed." "You were her brother," Leo said. "That's when you're supposed to show up." "I know," Evan whispered. "I know." His voice cracked. "I got a job offer in another state. I told myself it was just temporary. But the longer I stayed away, the easier it became to stay away." Leo shook his head. "That doesn't explain 15 years of silence." Evan looked at him. Tears edged his eyes. "I thought she hated me." "She didn't. I know that now. But back then, every day I didn't call made it harder to imagine what I'd say, if I ever did. Shame has a way of multiplying when you feed it with silence." Leo's mouth twisted, emotion bubbling beneath the surface. "She cried sometimes," he said. "After I went to bed, I'd hear her in the kitchen. I used to think maybe someone had died. But nothing ever happened the next day." No calls, no funerals, just tears. Evan dropped his gaze to the floor. Leo continued softer now. She was grieving you. Evan nodded, swallowing hard. I know. She deserved better. She did. I deserve better. You did. The boy's voice rose. So why now? Why come back when there's nothing left to fix? Evan stepped forward, slow, careful. Because even if it's too late to fix what I broke, it's not too late to be who I should have been all along. Leo's eyes flashed. You think a few coffees and a dog walk makes up for it? No, Evan said without hesitation. But it's something. And if all I'm allowed to do is be a witness to your life from the sidelines, then I'll do that. Happily. Because you're worth showing up for. Leo turned away, back tense, shoulders heaving. Promise whimpered quietly, sensing the emotion. Evan took another step. She loved you more than anything, Leo. She never stopped talking about you. Even in her letters. Even in the tape. It was always about you. Leo didn't turn. But he spoke. She kept one of your shirts in her closet. Evan blinked. She did, yeah. It was old, torn, smelled like oil and regret. A sad laugh escaped Evan's lips. That sounds about right. Leo finally turned, his voice softer now. She said she hoped someday you'd come back and see the man I became. Said that would be her final piece. Evan nodded. Slow. Quiet. I see you, Leo. The boy looked down. I don't know if I can forgive you. You don't have to, Evan said. I'll keep showing up anyway. The silence returned, but it wasn't angry this time. Just full. Leo picked up his backpack and slung it over his shoulder. At the door, he paused. Can I come by tomorrow? Evan nodded, surprised. Of course. I need help with something, Leo said. Art project. School. They want us to do a portrait of someone who changed our life. Evan froze. Are you thinking of doing me? Leo smirked. Don't flatter yourself. I'm painting Promise. Evan laughed, a real deep laugh that hadn't seen daylight in years. Fair enough. Leo stepped outside, but just before the door closed, he looked back and added, but I might need you to hold still for some sketches. Then he was gone. Evan stood in the quiet, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a door slowly opening, and someone on the other side, finally walking through. The canvas stood tall on the easel, blank, untouched, full of silent possibility. Leo sat cross-legged on the floor, pencils scattered beside him, like fallen twigs. Promise lay sprawled behind him, tail twitching, with each new pencil stroke. Evan watched from the couch. He wasn't used to being still for this long. But Leo had asked him not to move too much. You fidget, the boy had muttered. You breathe loud. Evan had laughed. Now he sat statue-still, trying to be the version of himself worth sketching. Leo's eyes narrowed in concentration. He moved with confidence. No wasted lines. No hesitation. Evan wanted to ask what he saw. What version of him was being transferred to the canvas? The broken man who left the one, trying to make amends. The stranger, the uncle. But he stayed silent. Because sometimes Leo didn't need questions. He needed space. After a while, the boy set his pencil down and leaned back on his hands. It's not done, he said, but I think you should see it. Evan stood and walked over slowly. The drawing wasn't just him. It was Promise, too, lying between them. And Leo in the background, blurry, but watching. There were no sharp lines, just shading, soft outlines, wounds hidden in shadows, eyes filled with something unspoken. Is that how you see me? Evan asked. Leo shrugged. It's how I feel you. Evan's chest tightened. He looked closer at the smudge of warmth near the heart, at the way the shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in surrender. Acceptance. Do you hate me, Leo? The question came out before he could stop it. Leo paused. Then, no. I used to. But not anymore. Why not? Because you came back, and you didn't have to. Evan looked away, blinking fast. Do you forgive me? Leo stood, picked up a clean paintbrush, and dipped it into the jar of water. He looked at the canvas again, studying it like it had something left to teach him. I don't know if forgiveness is a switch, he said. I think it's more like painting in layers. You add a little every day. Some parts dry faster, some parts bleed, but eventually, it looks like something whole. Evan let the words sink in. Leo began painting. Gentle strokes, muted colors, the smell of acrylic and old wood filled the room. I used to think forgiveness meant saying everything was okay, Leo said. But it doesn't. It just means I'm tired of carrying the weight. Evan nodded. That's fair. And I want to make space for new things. Like what Leo smiled faintly. Like a dog that eats too fast. And a man who shows up with coffee every Thursday. They painted together in silence for a while. Leo worked on the edges. Evan filled in the background. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. When the portrait was done, they propped it on the windowsill to dry. Promise wandered over and sniffed it, tail wagging once. Leo took a step back. It's weird, he said. What is that I don't hate this anymore? The house, the town, even the silence. Maybe it's not silence anymore, Evan said. Maybe it's peace. Leo nodded. Maybe. He turned to Evan. Can we hang this somewhere? Evan thought for a moment, then pointed toward the farmhouse. In the living room, where she used to keep the mirror. That wall always felt too empty. Leo smiled. Okay. They carried the portrait between them, careful, steady. Promise padded behind. The sun dipped low, casting golden light through the trees. Dust swirled in the air like confetti. As they entered the house, Evan paused. He looked at the wall, then at the boy beside him, and he realized something. This wasn't just a portrait. It was a doorway. Forgiveness, to memory, to a future not yet written, but finally possible. Together they hung the frame. Nails in wood, breaths held, and then release. It stood crooked for a moment. Then Leo adjusted it. Perfectly straight. Evan stepped back and whispered, "Welcome home." Leo looked up at him, and for the first time, he smiled without hesitation. The first snow came early that year. Tiny flakes, soft as whispers, drifted down over Millbury, like a memory gently returning. Evan stood on the porch of the farmhouse, mug in hand, steam curling into the cold. Promise sat at his feet, ears twitching with each gust of wind. The world was hushed, blanketed in white, still. Behind him, the floorboards creaked. Leo appeared in the doorway, wrapped in an oversized hoodie, eyes still heavy with sleep. "There's something you should see," the boy said. Evan followed him inside, past the kitchen, through the narrow hallway, to the room that had once been Clara's. It smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The bed was still made a little too neatly, the bookshelf untouched. Leo crossed the room and knelt beside the dresser. He opened the bottom drawer and pulled out a shoebox wrapped in faded ribbon. "I found it yesterday," he said. "Wasn't sure if I should open it." Evan hesitated, then sat beside him on the edge of the bed. "Together?" he asked. Leo nodded. The ribbon fell away easily. Inside, photos, old receipts, a locket, a dried flower from a bouquet long forgotten. And near the bottom, a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges. Evan's name written in Clara's unmistakable script. His breath caught. He held it for a long moment, then opened it. The paper crackled. Ink had smudged in places. But her voice came through clear, as if she were standing beside him. "Evan, if you're reading this, you came back. I don't know when or why, but I'm glad." He paused, the words swimming. "I used to believe people only left when they stopped caring. But I learned sometimes they leave because they care too much. And it hurts to stay." Evan blinked hard. "You hurt me. You really did. But I also know you were hurting too. You just didn't know how to say it. If you've come back for Leo, thank you. That boy needs you. But more than that, you need him. He's the best parts of both of us." Leo looked down at his hands. Evan kept reading. "I hope he forgives you someday. Not because you deserve it, but because he deserves the peace it will give him. Don't waste time making speeches. Just show up. Feed the dog. Fix the leaky faucet. Stay through the quiet." Evan let out a shaky laugh. She always mentioned that faucet. Leo smiled. The letter continued. I left this box because I wanted you to remember we were real. That once we had joy. Not perfect, but true. And it mattered. I forgive you. Not because you asked, but because I wanted to. Come home, Evan. Whatever that means now. Just come home. She hadn't signed it. She didn't need to. They sat there for a long time, neither speaking. Outside, the snow fell harder. Inside, the silence wrapped around them. Not heavy, but warm. Like a blanket pulled from storage, full of scent and memory. Leo reached into the box again, pulled out a Polaroid. It showed the three of them, Evan, Clara, and baby Leo, sitting under a tree. Clara held a slice of watermelon. Leo was laughing. Evan had one arm slung around his sister's shoulders. We were happy, Evan whispered. For a while, Leo said. That's enough. Evan looked at the boy beside him. No longer just his sister's son. Now, something more. A bridge, a second chance. A reminder. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his coat pocket. Then he stood. Come on, he said, where I need to fix a faucet. Leo laughed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. They walked down the hall, Promise trotting after them, tail wagging tongue. Outpaws clicking against the wood. And behind them the snow kept falling. Soft, steady, like a blessing. The farmhouse had never seen so many lights. Strings of warm white bulbs looped along the porch rail. A modest wreath hung on the front door, handmade from pine ribbon, and a crooked little bell Leo insisted on keeping. Inside the living room glowed with candles flickering like tiny heartbeats against the window panes. Evan stood in the center of it, all tangled in a string of ornaments. He cursed under his breath, then stopped himself when Leo passed by. Language, the boy said with a smirk. Right, Evan muttered. Christmas spirit. Promise. Wearing a red bow awkwardly fastened around his collar, barked once as if in agreement. It had been years since either of them had really done Christmas. Leo had spent most holidays at school events or alone with a takeout meal and reruns. Evan had learned how to skip holidays altogether. He made a habit of pretending the calendar was empty. But this year was different. This year. They were trying. Leo placed the last ornament on the tree, a ceramic angel with one chipped wing. Clara's name was carved on the back in tiny letters. I thought she'd like to be here, he said. Evan swallowed. She is. The room was quiet for a moment. Just the sound of the fire crackling, the dog sighing. Then Leo crossed the room and handed Evan a wrapped box. I made something. Evan looked at the gift, unsure. For me, Leo raised an eyebrow. Well, I didn't wrap it for the dog. Evan sat down, tore the paper slowly. Inside a frame, a drawing, of the three of them, Clara in the middle, Evan on one side, Leo on the other. Promise at their feet. I used the photo as a reference, Leo said, the one from the shoebox. Evan stared at the image. Clara's smile was gentle. His own face older but present. And Leo, not as a child anymore, as he was now, strong, watching. It's beautiful, Evan said, voice thick. I figured, we can't get the moment back, but we can make a new one. Evan nodded, then reached behind the couch and pulled out his own gift. It was smaller, sloppily wrapped, clearly rushed. Leo opened it slowly. Inside a key. To the garage, Leo asked, confused. No, Evan said. To your garage, or art studio, or whatever you want it to be. Leo blinked. You're giving me the garage. I'm sharing the garage. Let's not get crazy, Leo laughed, then stared at the key for a long time. I used to think gifts had to be expensive, he said. But this might be the best one I've ever gotten. Evan smiled. We'll wait until you see the plumbing tools I got you. Total thrill. They laughed, and this time, it wasn't cautious. It wasn't careful. It was home. As the night wore on, they made cocoa. Promise got a bite of ham. Leo played a Christmas playlist Clara used to love, out of tune, a little scratchy, but perfect. At one point, Evan stepped outside. Snow had fallen again, just enough to blanket the yard. The bench sat quietly beneath the tree, the same one where he'd first fed Promise that sandwich. He walked over, sat down. Everything felt different now, not because the pain was gone, but because it had a place to live, a place that wasn't bitter, a place that wasn't empty. Inside, Leo lit another candle and set it by the window. Evan watched it flicker from outside, a signal, a memory, a welcome. He whispered into the cold night, "Merry Christmas, Clara." And in his chest, for the first time in decades, there was no ache, only warmth. The snow melted slowly that year. It clung stubbornly to the corners of rooftops, the shadows behind fences, the edges of old sidewalks. But eventually, winter loosened its grip. By March, tiny buds appeared on the maple tree behind the farmhouse. The wind still had a bite, but it carried the scent of something new. Evan stood in the garage now, half workshop, half art studio. On one side, his tools hung neatly on pegboards. On the other, Leo's easel stood tall, surrounded by a mess of paint tubes and torn sketches. The space smelled like turpentine and engine grease. Somehow it worked. Promise wandered between the two of them, tail swaying occasionally, flopping down in a sunbeam with a satisfied grunt. Evan tightened a bolt on an old motorcycle engine, while Leo sketched loose lines, forming something unknown, but alive. "You ever think about leaving again?" Leo asked, suddenly not looking up. Evan paused, wrench in hand. "I used to think about it all the time," he said, "before you showed up. Now, not really." Leo nodded. "Good." A long beat passed. "You still scared?" Leo asked. Evan set the wrench down slowly. "Yes," he admitted. "Not in the same way, but yeah." Leo finally looked up. "Of what?" "Of messing this up. Of saying the wrong thing. Of loving something again and losing it." Leo wiped his hands on a paint-stained rag. "Well, I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen, but I can promise you this. I won't let you disappear." Evan met his gaze. "And I won't leave. Not again." They stood in silence. Promise let out a sigh, like punctuation. Leo smiled. "You know he said they're planting flowers at the school this year. Memorial garden. For who, anyone? Students pick someone they want to honor." Evan looked at him carefully. "You thinking about your mom?" Leo nodded. "And I want you to come with me. To plant it." Evan's throat tightened. "I'd be honored." They didn't say much after that. But the quiet between them wasn't empty. It was full of things that didn't need saying. A few weeks later, they arrived at the school with a small tray of daffodil bulbs and one tiny trowel. The other students were there with roses and sunflowers and favorite photos of lost grandparents or beloved pets. Leo chose a spot beneath a cherry blossom tree. He knelt in the soft earth and dug a small hole. Then he paused, looked at Evan, and held out one of the bulbs. Evan took it. His hands trembled. Together, they pressed it into the ground, covered it, patted the soil gently. No ceremony, no speech, just a promise. A quiet vow buried in the earth. For Clara, for forgiveness, for the life still waiting to bloom. As they stood to leave, a breeze passed through the trees, rustling petals, like applause, like memory. Leo whispered almost to himself, "She'd like this." Evan nodded. "She'd love it." They walked home slowly. Promise trotted ahead, chasing shadows. The world around them was waking up. And for the first time in years, so were they. Spring gave way to summer, slowly, gently, like a curtain being drawn open after a long sleep. The fields near the farmhouse turned green again. Birdsong returned in the early mornings. And the porch swing, the one Clara used to sit on, with a book in her lap, creaked back to life with a fresh coat of paint and 2 new cushions. Evan sat there most mornings now, coffee in hand, Promise curled at his feet. Some days, Leo joined him. Other days, he painted. But no matter the day, they were together. And that changed everything. One morning, as the sun rose behind the hills, Evan pulled out the letter again, the one Clara had left. He'd read it dozens of times, but today, it felt different. Not like a wound, not like guilt, It felt like a guide, a reminder of the woman who had loved him even in absence, a sister who had believed he would find his way back, and a mother who had left behind a son full of her courage. He folded the letter and slid it back into the tin box they now kept by the fireplace. Leo was at the table sketching. Promise snored beside the open window paws, twitching in some quiet dream. Evan stood and walked outside. He made his way to the garden, where daffodils had already started to bloom. He knelt beside the patch he and Leo had planted, ran his fingers through the soil. It was warmer now, softer, full of life. He whispered, "Thank you," to Clara, to the silence that had taught him something, to the second chance he almost missed. That afternoon, Leo called from the porch. "Want to see the new piece?" Evan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked up. Leo held up a sketch. It was simple, just Promise lying in the sunlight. But something about it, the way the light curved around the dog's fur, the softness in his eyes. It felt whole. Evan grinned. "That's your best yet." Leo shrugged. "I'm still learning. We both are." They hung the drawing beside the first one, the family portrait Leo had made months ago. It looked different now, not because the image had changed, but because they had. Later that night, they sat under the stars. No music, no stories, just quiet. Promise lay between them, tail thumping softly each time Evan reached down to scratch behind his ear. Leo tilted his head back. "You think people really stay with us?" After they're gone, Evan looked at the sky, at the millions of tiny lights blinking through the darkness. "I think he said the love stays. The hurt fades, the guilt softens. But the love, that's what never leaves." Leo nodded, then whispered, "Good." Because even though Clara wasn't there, not in the physical, not in the way they missed, she was in every brushstroke, every daffodil, every line of a letter that ended with "just come home." And somehow, Evan had, not just to a house, but to himself, to Leo, to what mattered, to what never ever left. Sometimes, we don't realize the most important moments of our lives begin with something small, a sandwich, a dog, a quiet note tied to a collar. But that's how life often works, not with thunder, but with whispers. Evan didn't set out to change anything. He didn't think redemption was waiting at the end of a gravel road. He didn't expect a boy a dog, or a second chance. And yet, in choosing to stay, to listen, to keep showing up, he found what he thought he'd lost forever: love, family, and forgiveness that didn't erase the past, but built something stronger over it. Leo, too, learned that not every goodbye is final, that broken trust can grow roots again, that someone leaving doesn't mean they've stopped caring. And maybe you're watching this story because you needed a reminder that healing is slow, that love is still possible, that it's never too late to forgive or be forgiven. So if this story touched something in you, thank you. Thank you for staying, for listening, and for believing in the quiet magic of connection. We hope you'll subscribe, not just for more stories, but to be part of a community that believes even the smallest act of kindness can echo forever. Until next time, be well, be kind, and never underestimate what one good heart can do.